How concerned should we be?
Very concerned. I mean, this is something that the committee has been looking at for some time. Huge investments in the last couple of decades into our maritime capability, into the aircraft carriers, into the RAF with the Typhoon and indeed the F-35. But the Army is in a dire state. You have three main components to land warfare. That's your tank, your main battle tank, your armoured fighting vehicle and your recce vehicle. And in our case, you have the Challenger 2, you have the Warrior and you have the Scimitar. And they're all over 20, 30 or 50 years old without any upgrades. And I'm pleased that voices are now coming through to say this is unacceptable. We've whittled down our capability. We had 900 tanks a couple of decades. We're now going down to 148. And as we see in Ukraine, tanks are still required on the modern battlefield.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Up until now, we had thought that the modern battlefield would be in space rather than on the ground.
Who's the we there? That was the last defence review where there was a tilt. Absolutely right to invest in cyber and space security. We need to do that because this is a new advance in the character of conflict. But that doesn't mean you do it at the cost of your land forces. And our army is simply too small. We've cut down by 10,000 troops. I do hope that the Defence Review refresh, as it's being called, will look at these issues and reverse some of the swathing cuts that we saw that were made a couple of years ago.
The Defence Secretary, if he was sitting here, would tell me that we are the biggest investor in defence in Europe.
That is correct. We have our nuclear deterrent, which costs a lot of money. He has done an excellent job in ramping up the replacements to all these, but they won't come in. Our new battle tank, the Challenger 3, won't be completed till 2030. Likewise, with the recce vehicle, the Ajax has had so many problems, might actually be cut completely. And then the Warrior fighting vehicle, which is what I used in Bosnia and places like that, has a brilliant turret on the top of it, being replaced by Boxer, which is a wheeled vehicle, and it doesn't even have a big firing capability on the top of it. There's no turret. So he's, I think, concerned about this, wants to address this. But ultimately, it's up to the Treasury, it's up to number 10 to recognise the world is changing. We are now at war in Europe. We need to move to a war footing. We are involved in that. We've mobilised our procurement processes. We're gifting equipment. We need to face Russia directly and rather than leaving Ukraine to do all the work.
How vulnerable are we?
Well, on many occasions, we have to ask ourselves, what is that threat? If we see Russia wanting to do more things in the Baltics, for example, there would be an expectation, indeed anticipation, that we would participate in that. That requires land forces, air as well, and maritime too. And we've whittled it down over the last couple of decades. We've become complacent. So, yes, we're unable to meet all the taskings. On top of that, you have domestic issues as well. When there's flooding, when there's COVID, who do we lean on to jump in? It's the armed forces. And they're getting very, very tired of what they're doing. We need to invest to make sure that we retain people, the good people that are there. I have to say they're the most professional in the world as to what they do. But there's simply not enough of them, and the equipment is now obsolete.
We're only 3 hours away from war in Europe, as I found out when I went to Ukraine last week. And yet this government seems to be absolutely mired in challenges about the chairman and his tax affairs, the deputy prime minister and whether he's a bully or not. What are you going to do with this party?
Well, let's keep that in perspective, because it is these bigger issues that we need to be concerned about. The cost of living crisis here is caused, in part, by what's going on in Ukraine. The oil and gas prices, they've calmed down a bit, but they could easily spike too. But the cost of food going up in here, that's because something that you and I have discussed many times here, is because the grain isn't leaving Odessa. I want us to focus on these things. These are the things that will help our economy. These are the things that will help the British people. We need to make it clear the connection between our security and our economy and indeed our prosperity. They are not two separate things.
You happy with Nadeem Zahawi sitting on the backbenches with you?
I'll say, Nadeem has been one of my closest friends in Parliament. I'm very saddened by what's happened. He was a very effective chairman. He clearly thought that when it was labelled as careless rather than deliberate, his tax returns with the HMRC, that he could ride this through. Prime Minister, I think rightly, had a review of this because it became this dominating issue. Nobody could go into an interview studio and not be asked about it. When you get to that point, then the Prime Minister has to act. So he called this review, he got the results, and he's acted.
OK, it's always great to see you, Mr. Ellwood. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.